Sorry, I think we can go ahead.
Absolutely, and we are now streaming live on YouTube as well. This is
Brilliant.
so exciting.
Great, this is lovely.
Thanks, Madam President. Welcome, everyone, in this Women's Month of August. This is Absip's first event for Women's Month, but you can look forward to many more, which we'll be sharing with you in due course. Right, we are on 109 attendees, which is really exciting. I think that the hype speaks to the quality of the speaker that we have with us today. So before I introduce our speaker, our hashtag, because we are very much in the world of hashtags, is Absip Mbokodo. Okay, for those of you who don't know the spelling, it is on the invitation, but I think it's just me. So hashtag Absip Mbokodo, hashtag Women's Month, hashtag Leading the Way, any of them, all of them. We'd love to see this event, talked about all over social media. And the same goes for everything else that we are going to do for this Women's Month. So I'll start off with a fireside chat. I don't know if either of us have a fire going, Karabo. We'll be having a fireside chat nonetheless. And after that, you guys are welcome during the conversation to post your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll have some time for questions after that. And we're aiming to end off, for those of you who have other commitments, at about 7:15. So Karabo, welcome. Today, Karabo will share a story of how she became a financial services powerhouse. Ms. Morule is a director of Timebank and previously served as the managing director for personal finance at Old Mutual Limited from 2016 to 2020. She's also an alumnus of the University of Cape Town and Harvard Business School. She's a fellow with the Actuarial Society of South Africa and the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. In 2018, she was selected as a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. And in 2014, she was recognized as one of the 200 young South African leaders who are shaping the country's future. So we are in very good company today. Hi, Karabo.
Exactly. It's awesome to be here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll just head straight into the first question. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing. What are the important lessons that you learned as a child? And how do you feel that they helped to shape your career as it is today?
So I was born here in Johannesburg, in Soweto, and brought up and grew up there, and also in Emmarentia in Johannesburg. And born in Bara, for the people who know, Chriskwani Baragwana, as it was fondly named or known by Sowetans. And I think some of the important lessons that I've learned as a child, maybe to think of them as, humility is something which is very important to my parents, and they value it highly, treating everyone equally and with humanity. And then on my grandparents' side, they were farmers, and so agriculture, and I guess maybe talking about environmental sustainability, something which is close maybe to my heart. So yeah, farming and agriculture is, lots of people in my extended family on my father's side are involved in agriculture. And actually my parental grandparents' families were also sharecroppers and then went on to buy their own land. So, I think it's an interesting kind of background to have in relation to, I think, the land debate. Work ethic, the work rate of my parents is something which I think gave me a great foundation. And it's really because of the passion for the work that they were doing. So that's something which I think really matters for me, is I feel motivated to work long hours, and you kind of forget about it if you're passionate about what you're doing. Then education, of course, being a critical enabler to independence of mind, but also financial independence in particular. And I think for young women, that's quite important. And for Black people, that's really important, is financial independence and just the economic disparities that we've obviously all experienced. And then I think also in relation to education, I was, I guess, very fortunate, because actually on both sides of the family, there were people who were professionals. There were people who were nurses and doctors and teachers. lawyers, some of my cousins are now chartered accountants, they're engineers, magistrates. So I think working in a professional setting is something which I've also appreciated. And then being involved in drama as a subject and being exposed to theatre at a young age, it means, I guess, I never shy away from performance. And I think that reinforces a person's self-confidence and a love for the arts. And something which is, I think, quite interesting is you obviously only get the language to express it at a later stage. But I think something is about like understanding the construct of patriarchy and then what does that mean for a young woman growing up. And an interesting story is that I think, my parents took me to the toy store one time and they said, pick out a toy that you want. And I went to go get a toy car, like a Tommy. And I think people growing up in the 80s will be familiar with the Tommy car, And my mom was like, no, don't you want the doll, And I said, no. And my dad said, no, just let her pick whatever, toy she has. So I think that's quite important in terms of also informing my views around equality. And I think also that diverse upbringing means one is comfortable in many situations. So I feel like I don't get phased trying new things or being in new situations. So those are some of the things that I think inform my upbringing. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, there were some really valuable lessons there. And I love the car story. I mean, I've got a nephew who goes into the shops and picks a doll every time. And, we've got to be who we are.
Exactly. I know. One of my colleagues actually, she had a baby, I think it's 2 years ago now, but she was saying how she's going to bring up her child, non-gender specific. And I thought that's really great because I think it allows people to be who they want to be and grow into be who they want to be without really being confined by social constructs that are there. So I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the grandparents might find it a little bit difficult to get their heads around, but
no, for sure. I think exactly. And you know how it is, I think that's the one thing which I'm always mindful of. And I think you realize, with our parents and generation and their older generations, they kind of often want you to do things that are kind of in a particular way around it, and you realize it is gendered, but and so that's something which has been on my mind, and it's something which I know I like hate about the fact that, there's an expectation about you just because you're a woman or just because you're a man. And I think it's great that more and more people are aware of that. Yeah.
And I think that's a particularly important message for us to be sharing in Women's Month.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So talk to us. I mean, I think there are a lot of young professionals listening today who'll be really keen to hear about your career journey. So, what were the high points? What were the low points? And I mean, what was the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome so far?
Yeah, so my career trajectory is my first kind of full-time job was at JP Morgan. I think before that I actually did, do some work, administrative work in my dad's office when I was younger. And then I did some VAC work, actually for a boutique asset manager, KD's, when I was in varsity. And I also did the winter internship with McKinsey for 2 weeks, and then also did the JP Morgan internship as well. So those were kind of things that I did, but more formally is that I worked for JP Morgan and started in Johannesburg in 2005. And that obviously included 2 months of analyst training in New York, which was amazing, of course, in the Upper East Side, which is great. That's a great location to be, right? Close to Central Park and close to Grand Central Station. And actually, in fact, my time at JP Morgan was the first time I was introduced to Absip. And I think that's kind of also really great, is that fellow colleagues ensured that we were exposed to Absip and understanding what Absip was about. So that was really great. And then I moved to London in March 2006, where I worked in insurance securitized products in a small team of 3 people. And actually one of them was a Jamaican actuary who was also a Rhodes Scholar. And something about that was also quite interesting, I guess. I had an interview with him and it was telephonic. And so he actually was somebody who spoke with a very kind of posh British accent. So when I was going across, I just assumed it's some British guy. And then I get there and it's like a black person and I'm like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And I think I was very fortunate to have that, because I think in a city like London and in a very kind of, the type of work that you're doing in banking, I know everybody who's a member of Absip will be familiar with it. I think, especially when you're in a place like London, it's great from a cultural diversity perspective, but obviously the working environment that you're going to be in is largely white. And I think to have had somebody who was my senior was like that. And actually in JP Morgan, I think it was very diverse in the sense that, I mean, the people who were the head of global debt capital markets, and in particular securitized products, were actually people of color as well. So that was really something which was quite interesting about my maybe experience, in the sense that he was kind of very familiar in a way, that it's somebody who your experiences and what you think are cool and the American sitcoms used to watch growing up are very similar. So that's really cool. Yeah. And then I relocated to back, you know, when I left London, I relocated back to Johannesburg, and I joined Old Mutual, and I was located in Johannesburg with frequent trips to Cape Town, almost weekly for the first 18 months, which was something very different. And then I got a bit of a break when I moved into the corporate segment. And then in January 2016 is when I moved back into you know, the retail business as the managing director of personal finance. And I guess some of the highlights is obviously participating in the listing of Old Mutual Limited, you know, being part of the leadership at the time, and when it was one of the few financial services businesses where actually all the leaders of the businesses were Black people from January 2019 until I left. So that's something which is, I think, quite remarkable when you think about it. And that whole process was really fantastic, and getting to experience that and going to the Competition Commission, for example, to argue for the transaction to be approved, while attending at that meeting. One of the highlights was also really empowering the digital and innovation agenda for personal finance, the business unit that I ran at the last 4 years. Also playing a meaningful role in diversity and inclusion. So that included rolling out a program. Actually, it was based on nation building. It's a company called the Human Capital Engine, and it actually was great because it actually helps people and the participants confront the country's history and really understand why transformation is so important. So I think that's a big important thing actually for corporate South Africa to appreciate, because I think many people do take it as a checkbox exercise without really understanding the history of it. And what's great about the process is they go through all the legislation, which actually hindered people of Black people to actually really kind of be meaningful participants in society. So I think that was really cool. And also seeing the ascent of 3 women to the top 50 advisors in the employed tied agency force. So that was quite big. That's the tied agency force has been the one that's been there for 175 years. That's really Old Mutual. And to see that during my time, they went from no women to 3 women in a also similarly very highly male-dominated environment was something which is really special. And then engaging with the people in the business. So, the MD of of personal finance and the MD of the other retail businesses, they also participate in roadshows. But even when I joined Retail Affluent, I would go on those roadshows with the MD at the time, who was Ralph Mupita. And, but we would only go to the 5 kind of major cities in South Africa. Whereas I decided after, attending these, I would notice there were people who would like drive 2 hours to come and see me for a 2-hour meeting. And I just thought to myself, like, these are like the most productive people in our business. Why is it that they're like spending like 4 hours on the road to just come see me? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So I changed it around and I decided to rather go to some of the smaller outlying areas, because I can work from a laptop, I can work in a car. So you just get a driver and kind of, you go for a way and you're fine to work. So that's what I did. And the one time I went to Thohoyandou and the team took a collection out and they gifted me a Vavenda outfit. And so that was really, really special for me. So experiences like that, I think. And then also there were obviously many aspects of my time as the managing director of personal finance, which I count as significant achievements for the business that were achieved individually, but also because of my great team. Yeah. And then the lowlights, I guess, there's always going to be lowlights, but I think it's always important about how you think about it as a learning experience. So, one was also the transformation of one of the channels, which was something I think about often, but I probably would have needed another 5 years to really see that one through. So, because, when you are changing big complex organizations that have been a particular way for a long time, it takes a long time for them to transform, but that's something which I wish I'd been able to do. And then another example, which I often cite, is about being frustrated when I had been given a task with one objective in the business segment in corporate at the time, which was a cross-collaborative initiative across the retail businesses in corporate. And, the other retail partners just felt like I was not as the leader of this initiative, I was just not doing what they needed me to do, which was obviously deliver them leads to give them sales. That's really what they really wanted. And so I got this feedback through my MD at the time, that the Absip CEO was just saying this thing is really not working. And so I got like really, yeah, you know, it's not progressing at the desired rate. So it just so happened that this was mid-year review time. And after the mid-year review, I went on holiday with some friends, and I guess the Mediterranean sea air helped me a little bit. And my holiday with my friends did me very, very well, because when I came back, I went to the boss and I reminded him that I was actually operating as per his mandate. And the mandate that really mattered the most for the senior consultants in the business. And I was actually just mirroring the conversation we had had multiple times around what I was doing needed to be mindful of that. So I actually kind of spoke to him, and I just reminded him of that conversation. And basically we then agreed that he was going to go talk to the Absip CEO and represent why we had that conversation, and explain why we were progressing at the pace that we were, and highlighting actually the successes that we'd achieved in the context of, you know, so many challenges in trying to achieve this cross-collaboration initiative. And so that was really great, because it then, yeah, gave us some time. And actually, I know that what we set up during that time and has been greatly successful after that. So yeah, the biggest challenge, I would say, it's coming from a professional services environment in banking and coming into a corporate leadership role and managing people, because, you know, that's something which it's not necessarily something that comes naturally to everybody. I mean, you know, and I guess this is maybe something that I know a lot of people in the securities and investment space will probably also experience if they ever want to pursue a role in a corporate environment. And I was very fortunate in that the people in my team were the ones who taught me about people management. And so I guess, you know, they were very gracious in kind of reminding me, oh, Karabo, you should be doing this, you know, and, you know, whereas, I mean, with us in banking, you know how it is, it's like, so the big snafu that I had was within a month of my arriving, there was a guy who went on retirement after working at Old Mutual for 20 years. And I suddenly didn't give him a farewell in congruence with the norms at Old Mutual at the time. And I've never lived it down ever since. Whereas at JP Morgan, if you were leaving, like you arranged your own farewell, and like, you know, that was it. You just go off and like, you know, nobody really kind of cares. So that was something which was probably something that was a big learning point for me. But I really benefited greatly from that. Yeah.
You know, I think banking's got a very specific culture when it comes to people.
Yes.
But I think the important lesson, I mean, what I heard there was, you know, when things get hectic, take a holiday.
Yes. That's very true.
But I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, I think the point of life balance is really so important, particularly in this time that we're living in. People are working flat out. Women particularly are managing homes and, you know, managing teams and trying to manage, you know, in the workplace, be everything to everyone, be school teachers. And actually that time out and that break to just, you know, reorganize your mind is so important. So, I mean, I think I just want to emphasize that message, because that one is important to me. I'm a big believer in holidays. And then I think the other thing is, you know, I think that as women, we are very quick to take accountability. You know, when, you know, things go wrong, we are generally, and I am generalizing, but we are quick to say, you know, yes, I'm responsible for this, and to feel responsible for it. But I loved what you did there in going back to your MD and actually saying, you know what, you are also responsible for this. Because we can't just also be falling on our swords. We have to use our voices, and we have to hold people accountable, other people accountable where that's necessary.
Yeah.
So I really love that lesson as well. But now I have to ask, because I was quite devastated when I heard that you were leaving Old Mutual. You know, and it's so amazing, like, you know, as a mutual like myself, to see a strong Black woman in such a senior leadership position. You know, and I've said this before, but I would have loved to see a female CEO like next up in the running. And I mean, I know, you know, appointed by the board and all of that, but, you know, why did you decide at that point in your career, when you had gone so fast, to step back from that role?
So yeah, I do get this question a lot. And I guess you know what, having worked in banking for 4.5 years at the end of 2009, and more latterly with insurance securitized products, I must say I felt a bit of an imposter calling myself an actuary, but never having worked in a formal actuarial environment. And so that's one of the things that I considered in terms of what I wanted to do, was actually maybe go work for one of the insurers when I was then, moving back to South Africa. And so actually in August 2009 in London, I happened to get a call from someone who was an actuary who I knew from my time in South Africa. And he suggested we meet up. And when I told him I was coming back home, he insisted that there must be a role for me at Old Mutual. And he arranged for me to have a call with Ralph Mupita, who was the MD for Retail Affluent at the time. And obviously he's now the CFO at MTN. I think most people know him as. So we actually had a VC with Ralph, and he said, no, let's rather chat when you come back in December, but I'll think of something. And so when I came back, the following April was when I joined Old Mutual as a strategy and marketing executive in the retail affluent segment, so reporting to Ralph. And that segment was a precursor to personal finance. And I must say, after 18 months, I felt like I actually had a good handle on what insurance companies do and what actuaries do in them. And it's great. It was great to also see how the actuarial qualification was of value, because most of the general managers who were actuaries were not in actuarial roles. And what was also really great was the fact that I would go into spaces. I mean, as a strategy executive, you end up going to different segments and seeing different areas, and you go to kind of also branches and visit places with colleagues. And you would certainly, I mean, as a Black person, people would kind of say, what do you do type thing? And ask you kind of, who are you? And as soon as you say no, somebody, and more often than not, somebody else would say, oh no, she's an actuary. And then they like kind of straighten up. And so that's something which is certainly a perk in insurance companies and in actuaries. Kind of people really perk up, because the culture that's been ingrained for many years is, the most important people are actuaries. So, even though that might not be the case, but I think that it helped a lot in terms of then people hearing what you're saying, because they think you're saying something important, which is kind of a kudos that you get maybe just by incident. But it's great because, yeah, I think, I got that experience, and I think that played a lot in terms of me ascending to the levels that I did as well, in terms of, having that background in the technical knowledge helping a lot, even though I was working in non-technical areas, and that improved what I was able to achieve in those non-technical areas. And so for me, the way I think about it is actually any time I got to spend at Old Mutual after those 18 months was kind of a bonus, and an awesome bonus in relation to the roles and experiences that I got and the learning that I got as I ascended to the levels in a large corporate in South Africa. So yeah, so I think, it's quite interesting, and I do tell a couple of people this, before one of the other options, aside from working in an insurance company, was to, at the time, I guess many development finance institutions were failing, and I thought, well, my hypothesis was they must be financing some really good businesses. It's just that they're not able to support them in the way that they could. And so, having come from a securitized background and where you're negotiating contracts, etc., I thought actually that would be really cool, is go and think about restructuring kind of small businesses, which are really good ideas and actually good underlying businesses, but take advantage of the opportunity to see if you can grow businesses. And so actually what I want to do now is a bit related to that, but also something which I'm really passionate about. And I guess also having attended the World Economic Forum for Africa's events in South Africa, you get to understand, and there's a lot of talk about what can we do to improve Africa as an investment destination and growth on the African continent. And one of the things which I'm quite minded of is how, and especially having worked at Old Mutual, because this is really kind of what Old Mutual does, is how the savings and investment of ordinary people can be used to do so many great things, to invest in infrastructure, build schools, build roads, invest in renewable energy. And so actually what I want to do is also work with other African countries to help with getting more actuaries to qualify in those countries, because I think getting the people who design these financial services products to be able to get more of them being involved in that and designing products that are relevant for each country. That's something which I want to get involved in. And actually it's really great. I'm hopefully working with the Actuarial Society on their Rest of Africa committee to actually work with doing that as well. So. Yeah, those are a couple of things that I'm doing. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. I want to pick up on something you said about, people hearing you were an actuary and then, the kind of credit that goes along with that. So, I mean, your educational background is extremely impressive, right? And I know that there are a lot of young women out there thinking, should I study something else? Those who are, whether they've got a BCom or they're CA, should I be doing CFA? Should I be doing my MBA? Do you have any advice for how you kind of thought about that, or, what for people who are thinking about, should I be studying further, and the benefits that it perhaps gave you in your career?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I wanted to study actuarial science, one of the key reasons why I chose UCT was because it was a business science degree. And so it was a broad business degree that enabled you to get actually exposure to a lot of subjects that would be very useful kind of from a broad perspective. And that's what I loved about the degree. And I think it just allowed that flexibility. So from that perspective, that's what I guess I would say. But maybe that's a very South African kind of construct, because you get to London and there's people who are studying history, who studied history, and they're also sitting at the same banking desk as you, and they're also doing trading or they're doing structuring, etc. So I think that's something which is quite interesting about how it's thought about in places like Europe, where it doesn't really matter what you study from an undergraduate degree perspective, because the company will train you to do what you need to do from an everyday perspective. So I would say, try to study something that gives you the flexibility to achieve the things you want to achieve over the long term. And then remember that you have the opportunity to pivot from that later, actually, and grow into other fields of work and expertise if you put your mind to it. And I think one of the best things that also happened to me was being able to attend the Harvard Advanced Management Program last year, because I think that also just stretched my mind. And, it's kind of very fortunate that you get that exposure and learning from other people. And actually also don't forget that you can learn a lot from other people. And I'm so fortunate because I think I learn from my friends and family all the time. And so that's, I think, the big thing to think about is just ways to keep learning.
Yeah, that Harvard AMP is definitely on my bucket list as well.
It's really awesome.
But that was really, really useful advice. Thank you. So, yeah, there are a lot of options out there, and I think some of them are genuinely just going to be letters behind your name, but we mustn't forget actually the lessons that we can learn from each other. Even if it's the people that you work with, and like you say, your friends and family, probably our greatest life lessons come from there.
That's so true. So true, Kelly.
So here's a question on the glass ceiling. Have you personally been confronted by the glass ceiling? Do you believe it exists? I mean, we know it existed 20, 30 years ago. Does it exist today? What is your advice to women who feel that their prospects are constrained? I think particularly in financial services, because it is still quite male dominated.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think I've benefited from the fellowship of other women in navigating that male-dominated environment. Maybe let me say that first off. So, at JP Morgan, we formed JP Morgan Women for Analysts and Associates after the first few months of the global financial crisis. And especially because many people kind of heard the horror stories of what happened with the dot-com bubble and how many associates kind of were retrenched and fired, basically, and many people were concerned that might happen again. And what was really great was from that association, it was really great for networking and learning. So I was on the organizing committee, and we actually then arranged for several managing directors, so female managing directors, to come and talk to us about their journeys. And we learned, I think I learned 2 pivotal lessons from some of those sessions. So one was from an MD who was based in the US. She said, the big thing I learned from her was make setbacks comebacks, turn setbacks into comebacks, because she actually also said, how she had a child at a very young age. While she, I think it was maybe she was a second-year analyst, and then how she kind of, in the US, obviously, there's like almost 0 maternity leave. And like she came back on the desk and she just used what would have seemed like a setback there to kind of really power on so strong. And, she became a managing director, I think at a fairly young age as well, really focused on business and how to perform and understanding how are the constructs managed? And I think, especially in banking, it's like all about what's the business you can bring in. And so that's how she was able to achieve that. And the other one was also advocating for groups that don't have a voice when you are at the highest levels of an organization. So she was actually the sponsor for the LGBTIQ community at JP Morgan. And for the longest time, I thought she must be lesbian. And it turned out like, no, she was just advocating for this group. So it was really cool. That was an interesting learning for me to say, remember, use the power to give a voice to other people as well. You know, who they might not be like you or represent you, but use your power to advocate for them. So that was, I thought, really, really interesting. And then another one was an MD who's covering Spain and Portugal, and she spoke about advocating for yourself. So she told the story of how she was promoted to MD while on maternity leave. So in the UK, it's very different to the US. I think you can go on maternity leave for a year. And so she was on maternity leave when the promotion rounds were coming up, and she spoke about how she actually put together a presentation that she was going to give to members who she knew were fellow people who were MDs already and who might be on the selection committee. And she just told them about her achievements. And I think one thing that it just reminded me was just remember to advocate for yourself to people who can talk about you in a room where you might not necessarily be there, because that's quite important. You know, you're not going to be there when they're thinking about promotions and who to promote to the next level. So make sure there's other people who know what you've done, because that's quite important. And it needs to kind of be very, very clear on what's the areas of outperformance and the learnings or reflections when things haven't gone well. And showing that also shows that maturity to say, acknowledge when I've not done things well, but I can also say, this is how I've performed. So that was really interesting. And I think those are some very important things. I think I've been very fortunate that in the corporate sense and, you know, at Old Mutual, I think very fortunate in that I had so many sponsors who were male and females as well. But, you know, all my bosses were male. And I guess what I benefited from was maybe this collaboration initiative enabled me for me to have, like, speak to different people who could then represent what I was doing in different places. And actually that's something which my boss in corporate also reminded me of, is Karabo, you know, you're at the level where you can set up time with somebody who's 2 levels senior than you and talk about this initiative, and it won't feel like it's a bit awkward, like you're stretching, like you really genuinely are going to be talking to them about why this is so important. And try to think of people who are relevant to what you're doing or relevant to the cause, but remind them about all the achievements. And so I did that. Like, I would set up meetings and I'd have like a 3-page pack where I'd go through the achievements, the challenges, and just talk them through what are we doing. And I think that helped a lot. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I think, you know, you started with, and the question in my mind when you were talking about these women that you'd experienced is, what about men? Because I think men have a really important role to play as well in helping women to break the glass ceiling, if in fact it does exist, but in empowering women.
Yeah.
You know, so we have these conversations and we have them as women, and it's absolutely important for us as women to support other women. But we need to capitalize on those men in those positions of power who are prepared and willing to help women rise up. So absolutely love that. I'm glad you brought in the men, because if you didn't know, I was going to ask.
It's very important, actually. So there's a friend who has a fintech startup, and they, you know, myself and a group of friends, we have an investment, like a stock file, which we put a small amount of money into this business. But he keeps saying, you know, Karabo, please, can you write an article for our blog? And it's Women's Month, please write something. And I said, well, I'll do it as long as you get a guy to write about what they're going to do to empower more women. So yeah, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, let's just talk about it, because it is a Women's Month and you've just mentioned it. So, I mean, what does Women's Month and Women's Day in particular mean to you? And I mean, is it something that we should just be doing away with? Do we still need it? Is it, you know, is it still relevant? Is it still important?
It's, I think, definitely relevant and important. And for me, it's about being inspired to take action, because that's what the women of 1956 did, you know. So I think it's also about reflecting on the women who supported you on your journey. For me, you know, there's maternal figures in my life, the sorority I feel from family friends and friends who have become like my sisters, the amazing women that we celebrate, the people we work with, you know, I was at Old Mutual, it's the Kellys. and just the people who are slaying in the corporate world. So, one's fellow colleagues in the world in general, because you appreciate that the world isn't always supporting and accepting of women taking up their space. So that's why I think, Women's Month is still very, very important. And I think we should definitely carry on celebrating it. Yeah. But you're so right, it shouldn't be performative, and that's why I say it's about being inspired to take action.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I mean, like, I'm just running with the fact that it's August, and because I think we forget, we're so busy living our lives and kind of, trying to keep our own heads above water, that we forget to celebrate each other and other women. And, now it's just, I mean, personally, I'm trying every day of this month just to celebrate one other woman. And, I'd love to do it every day of the year, but unfortunately that's not practical. But I mean, luckily with Absip, we do try to do that throughout the year. So I guess one of the other things that, we believe as Absip is that we need to lift as we climb. So just tell me a little bit about your philosophy on that, and, what are your thoughts on what we can do to lift up other women?
So I thought about this, I think, a lot in my time as MD, because I think I was the first woman, actually managing director of personal finance. So it weighed on my mind quite a bit. And I did do it in kind of small ways. I'll give you kind of a sense of some of the things is, in the distribution channels, at the beginning of the year, they have functions to celebrate the achievements of the kind of sales teams. And so, there's like 30 areas in the employee tied agency force, and I would try to attend, some of those events. So out of the 30, I probably attend 6. So it's like, normally on a Saturday, you're going to an evening function. And what I was then, I started to do was be very deliberate about actually attending the functions of the women area managers. And I think, again, in the sales force, it's a very big, they view it as a real honor that the managing director of the business is there. And so I thought it's really important to support the female area managers in that way. So those are the people who I supported. I would also think quite strategically about which of the areas that I supported. If it was a particular area where I know, the customer focus was very important, and that's what would make up my speech to the teams at that evening function, I would make sure that that was a key focus. So often I would focus on Gauteng. That was a key strategic area for us, but I would try and make sure and make a point to attend the area functions for the women in the business, because I just wanted to also let them know to show up for them, and also let them know that I wanted them to succeed. And that was always my message to them as well. And I think, focusing on general, the EE kind of requirements in my team as well. Most businesses will have like a 2/1 approval for non-EE appointments. And it was interesting, when I got into the MD role, I was very minded about transformation, but it was obviously, you're in a big power position. You want to make sure you're focusing on the performance before you sometimes delve in on other issues, And so I remember the first time I think there was like a headcount freeze. So I actually had to go to the CEO at the time to go and get the approval. And it was Dave McCready at the time. And so I went to him and I said, yeah, I need your approval, but the motivation is not really that great. And he just said, yeah, then don't do it. Don't sign it off. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is great. And so I think that's also important is, sometimes it's good when your manager gives you the freedom to also, actually do these things. And I mean, they're in line with our constitution. That's the highest court in the land. But it was great that I was able to achieve that. And, from the time that I was there, yes, we had the promotion of white people, we had the appointment of white people, but actually 80% of the appointments and many of the promotions were exceptionally talented and deserving Black people. So, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Another thing was improving the number of women on my executive team. And I guess, again, actually our legislation kind of guides us in that, but that's one of the things that was a focus of mine as well. And I was really proud of the fact that, when I started, there were only 2 people out of an 8-person team who were women. They were in enabling functions. And when I left, there were 5, 3 of whom were managing distribution channels. And so that's 50% of the sales channels were managed by women, and all of them were Black women. So actually throughout, I've been talking Biko Black. It's not to minimize their cultural backgrounds, but yeah, they were Black women. So that's really cool. And then I think also, really cool. Yeah. And then I think also being inspired by, like I say, the leaders, I mentioned Dave, even Peter was very passionate about ensuring people, he thought about equality and, justice quite a bit. And so, he was really passionate about making sure that everybody was earning a living wage. And we actually also had started having discussions about equal pay. And so I think, the people in my human capital team got a bit of a fright when I said, guys, I actually want to do something about this. And so, just achieving things like that, I think is really important. And those are the real issues, that we face in our country. So yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that the gender pay gap is being talked about at those levels, because one wonders, we all know that it exists, but to actually hear that it's part of the conversation is great. And I love what you're saying. I think that part about just showing up, as a senior woman, just showing up for other women. Sometimes, that's all you actually have to do is literally just be there, showing your support. So, I love that. And I had to have a little laugh also at enabling functions, so I'm assuming that it was like HR and marketing.
Yeah, there's HR and marketing, yeah.
So,
and we still had women at the end, in HR marketing, but
and absolutely, and great respect to people in HR and marketing, but that is not the only place where we belong.
That's exactly it.
So in those critical roles, we need to get women more into those roles and into believing as women that we can do those roles.
Yeah.
And so, I think, having you up there as a role model that's already doing so much for women.
Thank you. Yeah. And I got similar support. I remember, when Anisha and Rose were there, that was the chief operating officer and the chief, chief HR officer. They also attended my functions as well. And so it's really important actually for people to show up for each other. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm going to check the Q&A section now. Let me just see. Right. Balancing skills on the board of directors. Okay. I don't think that's a question. Okay, so this is one from Checho Ramatlo. Looking at our sector as it is today, how would you encourage us and those starting out, or those of us who are mid-career, to start engaging with the largely white and male leadership teams around diversity and inclusion? As a leader, how do you entrench a culture of diversity and inclusion and belonging, such that everyone feels and knows that they are bringing value to the organization?
I think what's really brilliant about the fact that this conversation has matured to where it is now is the fact that there's more and more evidence that talks about how diverse teams kind of really outperform. And I think it's about also, when you're in a team where there is some diversity, be mindful to also kind of find ways where you can also help with bridging the gap, because that's some of the things that you kind of realize when you're in a team where it's not diverse is it just feels like you're talking a different language. If you're the only woman in an all-male team, it can be very frustrating because it does really feel like, nobody's hearing you. And so I think as you get more people who are like you, I think about how ways in which you can support that other person in terms of the points that they're making to really, reinforce what they're saying, because in amplifying what they're saying, that's kind of highlighting why it's important to have a different voice in the room. So it's really great. A couple of weeks ago, I met with a lady who is leaving UBS to start a fund called Fund the Women. And it's more so because she realized that, yes, regardless of the data that's there, still 92% of startups are all male startups, and they're getting a lot of funding. Whereas she has seen time and time again that diverse startups are the ones that really outperform and perform by multiple times over those which are not diverse. So I think, that's an element of it is, how to engage it is just about talking about why it's there. And that's why I thought that company was so good, because, and obviously it was very tactical. I did this quite deliberately, is that it's there are two partners in that business. And there's a lady by the name of Professor Jackie Nodia, who's a kind of established, white lady. And I got her to come and do the talks, because I think people then start to listen to it differently when it's like, to be frank, like a white lady saying, guys, like this is all the stuff in the legislation. Do you understand what the impact of this is? And so those are things that you think about and use those tools to get people to actually think about how to express it in ways that is not threatening to people, and people engage in the conversation more openly. So it is really important. I think it's a really great question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do think, unfortunately, we do still need to ease into these conversations.
Unfortunately, yeah, it really is unfortunate. Yeah.
Here's a question from Anonymous. How do you manage the work-life balance? Having heard you say that you can work for hours because of your passion, but perhaps your family also wants a lot of your time.
Yes, it's very true, and it's very difficult, I must say. You know, there's many times when my parents would chastise me because I call them like only once a week, and I think my mother wants me to call it every day, and I just wouldn't be able to, even though, you know, I love them dearly. But and it is very hard. I think you know, manage is the good descriptor for it, because I think it's hard to achieve. And you can just try. And I think the big thing I'm always mindful of is try and manage your energy. And that's something I learned from friends as well, is manage your energy. And if you're feeling down, take the time off, because you're no use to other people if you're not feeling well, or not in kind of the right energy space to be able to do the things that you do. But yes, I mean, I must say, you know, that time as managing director, it takes a lot of your time. You know, like I say, there's lots of weekends when you're attending functions. Unfortunately, you can, you know, if you can take a partner, so I'd travel sometimes with my sister, or take a, you know, a family friend or one of my friends, because then I know that that's time that I can spend with them and we'll obviously be having fun. So I used to kind of try and do that as well, is, you know, spend some time. And, you know, sometimes on the trips I'd go with my mother, and like, so that's a nice trip. Or take my dad, you know, if it's the Nedbank Golf Challenge, you know, that would be the person I then take with me. So it's kind of like work, but I get to spend some time with them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, trying to find that balance is so important. And again, particularly now, particularly with this lockdown, I mean, it's hugely emotionally draining, you know, so take your walks and, you know, see your friends, you know, even when you're not supposed to, see them one at a time, wear masks.
I've been doing a lot of yoga. Yeah.
Yeah,
which I never got to do before. Yeah. Yeah.
Karabo, here's another question, also an anonymous one, but thanks for your insights so far. What are your views on the rate of transformation in financial services?
Paulo's article was bang on the head around the challenges that we're all facing. You know, I think, yeah, like you just get disheartened. I mean, I was sitting in a committee meeting and there's an auditor who's pitching or telling us about how they've done so much for transformation. They've been educating Black people for the past 20 years. And then you look at the specialist team and there's not a single Black person on the team. And it is very, very frustrating. So I don't think there's been enough. I think there's far too many people who have just then also felt frustrated in corporates because it's not been an environment that has been inclusive and so welcoming to them. And it's something to really work on. Actually, going back to the other question, something else that we did was we made sure that all the interview panels where we wanted to, you know, obviously you're generally wanting to hire Black people. What we would do is make sure that at least the interview panel was 50% Black. And it's because how can it be that you're creating this veneer of an inclusive environment if actually the people who are interviewing are not inclusive and not diverse? So again, that's another trick where I think it's quite important to do that, because it makes sure that you have kind of a very kind of rounded perspective of a potential candidate. And there's people who will, you know, just aggregate between the content of what somebody's saying and maybe their accent, which might be distracting for somebody else just because it's different. So there's things like that which I think are very important for us to do. And I think there's people who are doing it really well, not doing just the checkbox exercise, being really deliberate about how they're thinking about all aspects of our business and what needs to transform. It's just not about just the people who are there. And if you're really serious about transformation, you're willing to change your processes, you're willing to think about who's a good customer, who's a bad customer, you're willing to think about the different products that you have and why, you know, some are just not working for everybody. And that's really important. So I think, yeah, unfortunately, in transformation and financial services is not where we need to be. Yeah, it needs to improve greatly. Yeah.
But I love that what you're saying about the interview panels, because I mean, the thing is, I don't think we'll ever live in a world where people don't have a tendency or an affinity towards people who look like them, who talk like them, who, you know, so you can't stop unconscious bias. And the only way that you can actually manage it is to have that interview panel that actually looks like all of the candidates that, you know, might come in for those interviews. That's an amazing idea. I'm going to take that one and, you know, carry
it
it
works.
forward because
It really works. It really, really works. So please do. Yeah, you definitely should.
Yeah. No, I think everyone take note of that. I won't name any companies, but so here's from one of my favorite gentlemen in financial services, Asif Mohammed. And Asif, thank you for always supporting the women. Always great to see you. Yeah. So hi, Karabo. The last time we met was at an Absip UCT student chapter event. What is your role at Timebank, and why do you believe Timebank will be successful? What are the key success milestones and the time frames for Timebank success? So I think we're all very interested in Timebank.
It's a very interesting question, and yes, Asif, yeah, I remember that talk very great. You know, it does stand out in my mind actually. Yeah, the talk that we had. So my role at Timebank is actually I'm an independent non-executive director. So that's why I think there's an element of it where you know, it's always better to hear some of these stories from executives. But maybe I can just say, I think what is great about Timebank is the fact that it's a digital bank, it's an upstart bank. What I loved about it was also the fact that the founders, one of the original founders is on the board as well. And that energy is kind of, it's really something else, you know, to have somebody who's one of the founders of the business, and yes, you know, you still consider it a startup, even though it's hit 2 million customers, as just that startup energy. And that's what I kind of really enjoy, is the innovativeness of the executive team and how they're thinking about solving the challenges of, you know, banking in South Africa. So that's what has been really great to observe in the short time that I've been there. It's only been 3 months, and as you know, directors only kind of go have meetings like, you know, 4 times a year. So it's not like it's a lot of exposure, but that's the one thing which I thought was really great. I mean, so it's been very interesting so far.
We'll ask you again in a year. No, but I think it is challenging because you know, it does take a while, I think, to get to grips with a new company. So 3 months, it's a completely unfair question, Asif.
Yeah, it's been cool so far. I've been enjoying working with the team. Yeah,
I love this question because I think it hits home with me. But did you ever experience imposter syndrome at any point in your career? And if you did, how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so I guess I did speak about it a little bit in relation to kind of, yeah, my qualification, but actually having never worked in an insurance company. And so like I say, it's you know, I think maybe the insight from that is actually face it head on and see what you can do to if you feel like an imposter, I think, you know, actually more often than not, you're not. I think being authentic is really what's really important. Being yourself, because that's what I learned actually from, like I say, when I, you know, came into Old Mutual, it's about being yourself. I mean, the first strategy conference, I managed to produce with my team a 100-page deck. And so it gave a lot of people food for thought, but it was quite standoutish that actually that's what we did. So, so rather just be authentic, I think, you know, that's probably the more important thing. And if you feel like there's something that you don't totally have a hang on, yeah, rather, you know, face it head on and go and do the learning or speak to people about it, you know, rather kind of seek to actually deal with it. But more often than not, you know, it's not there. I think have the confidence to know that, you know, you're in the right place and what you're doing, you know, just believe in yourself. Yeah.
No, I love that. I mean, I think confidence is 90% of the battle. And then also just, you know, don't pretend if you don't know something.
Exactly. Very important.
Or ask.
Exactly. Very, very important.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's an important lesson that I learned in my career. When you don't need something, or when you don't know something, you know, say something. And if you need help, ask for it. Because, you know, if something does go wrong and you didn't say that you needed help, nobody's going to be there for you when things hit the fan. So that's just, sorry, that's mine. No, nobody asked me, but that's my little insight. You know, but you've touched on this, but the insurance industry tied sales force is still very much dominated by white males. How do we get more Black and female advisors to the top?
Yeah, so it's interesting because Yeah, I think a big component of it is actually the income structure. In many of the forces, it's still fully commissioned. It means you actually need to rely on people who can back you. And actually what's really interesting is actually when we've posed this to the top advisors, they actually remark on the fact that years ago, they actually had a different income structure that allowed people to build an income over a period of time rather than the way it was structured at the point in, the way it is now. And so that's also something which we acknowledge as something that we just then need to change. How do you make the sacrifices in the areas that you need to still be mindful of your channel economics, but drive kind of the agenda that you're trying to achieve in terms of making it more inclusive. And so that's something which we actually spent a lot of time thinking about it, and spend a lot of time thinking about the different strategies that could be employed to help people and still ensure that they're, given, they feel like they got their stripes, so that it wouldn't also seem like they were given a handout in some way. And so that's also quite important. And it's more just for kind of your credibility in that team, I guess, or in that construct, is you want people to feel like, you worked hard for it. Even though you did, it must seem like you did as well. And so that's something which, we thought a lot about as an executive team, is what to do about that. And you did start to see it, but I think what helps a lot is, when you've got more Black managers who are like at the sales manager level, at the area manager level, you're almost relying on them to also kind of lean into what are the issues that I'm seeing and what is a cool way that I can solve this. And it was one of those things that I think also works better if you have do it from the ground up. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, there's a lot of work to be done still.
Certainly.
This is quite a nice one as well. So this is from Tule Mahlanga. How would you advise us to negotiate for salaries? There's research that shows that women fail to negotiate theirs as opposed to male counterparts.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think just because also there's some situations which don't necessarily have a kind of a negotiation type structure, but I think, I can't say I have a lot of experience in this myself, but maybe something I would recommend is try and do some research about what is exactly the salary band that you could be in. And I think sometimes run people through your rationale of why you should be at the top of that band. And in talking to what your experiences are, what you bring, I think that also can help with shifting a perception about what your pay band should be. But I think that's, that was something which was quite interesting about banking, was your salary was quite defined. So there's an element of it which is a bit egalitarian, especially at the lower levels, even though, yes, your variable pay was then very variable and very subjective, which I think is then a challenge, because that's where the bias can fall in.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is often also we don't know. We don't know what other people are earning. We don't know if the gender pay gap is happening or not. So it's a related question.
Oh, before we move on, but I think also you do hear of horrific instances of people saying that, no, guys need more because they're looking after a family. That shouldn't have anything to do with it. Like, we're all doing the same role, right? So I think, it's totally true that, yes, I think where you certainly, and I think that's why in management it's so important for people to push for equal pay. Yeah. It's very, very important.
Yeah, so this is, it's a related question, and I quite like it, because they say in the UK, and you've got some experience from working in the UK, listed companies actually have to publish their salary statistics by gender in an effort to highlight any inequality. And there was a time these stats were considered for race as well. Do you think these types of tools are useful in reducing the gender/racial pay gap, and could potentially be useful in South Africa?
They could potentially be useful if people maybe read some of the detail. But I guess, and this is the thing, for people who are prescribed officers and listed companies, they have to publish your salary. So a lot of people could do that analysis themselves. And maybe this is something the analyst community can look into in terms of using the data that's there to actually get a sense of whether they're, how big the gap is in South Africa. But I think, yes, there's an element of it where public shaming in a way can help people to change. But I guess the key thing is, will people really change? And I think, you know, is it that a management team, just because it's not going to be published, is going to change how they're doing things? I'm not too sure. So I think it's more about agitating when you also get to management and challenging your leaders around whether they are mindful of these things. Do they think it's important? And challenging them to make sure that it is important, yeah, or be mindful of it.
Yeah, I suppose it is one of those things that you have more control over when you get to a position where you can see other people's salaries. So as more women rise up to senior positions, we can, you know, have an influence over that.
Yes, there's that, but I think people are very concerned about making themselves an attractive workplace, to be able to attract the best talent. And I think if it's clearer that yes, you know, that's not something that you're minded of, and myself as a talented individual, if I go there, I might, you know, get a lower increase for some other reason, not the fact that it's fair, or a different salary, not the fact that it's fair. I think if that is a known thing, I think few people will consider that place for employment as well. So hopefully people are thinking about that, yeah. And maybe that does mean that there's probably more activism that's required with people when they're looking for a job in terms of checking these things, you know, yeah. So something to think about. I guess I don't have the answer on it. Yeah.
Something for us all to think about. So this one is from Jasmine Bochenbol. So, I mean, we do acknowledge that you haven't been a director of Timebank for very long, but more generally, how do you see the role of new tech banks in financial inclusion?
I think, you know, Time talks, the team at Time talk about how kind of the way that they're structured allows for efficiencies to actually be able to make banking accessible to everybody. So I think they're very minded about financial inclusion and very minded about who the customer is and what does that enable. And I think a benefit that any kind of new company has is that they don't have legacy systems that they have to contend with as well. So that's true for kind of any fintech organization. I guess a lot of the you know, their argument is the fact that actually they don't have legacy systems, and so that makes them a bit more agile. And so I think that's one of the key roles, but it's also about people who are thinking about financial inclusion, not necessarily just thinking I'm new and so I am going to be inclusive. Yeah, it really has to be about the ethos of the company and what they believe.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Another anonymous, there's a lot of anonymous attendees, but you know, in your view, if you were to call out, and I find this one quite interesting, but if you were to call out one self-inflicted stumbling block or barrier that we create ourselves as Black professionals in corporate, you know, what would that be? Any own goals that we may score?
No, I think it's just feeling like you don't belong there when actually you have every right to be there. And so I think it's, yeah, you know, make sure people hear your voice, because your voice matters. You know, so I think that's maybe one of the big things is don't shy away and feel like, you know, your voice doesn't matter. Your voice really, really matters. Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the things that on both sides there's people are remiss to acknowledge the fact that, you know, diverse voices are important actually in making sure that the broader team performs better.
And then, I mean, another one, how do we get more women onto boards? So what do you think are the barriers, and how can women break into these boys clubs?
It's interesting. I think more and more people want to get more women on boards. And so I think, you know, one thing which I would definitely say is try and leverage the networks that you have. And an excellent tip that I learned from Yolanda, who I see actually also asked the question, and she said, just write to the chairman. So I think, you know, that's the one thing is actually this opportunity came about because a friend told me that they were looking for a board member. And so I happened to get in touch with somebody who works at ARC, because I know that that's the holding company, and it's somebody who I know. So and I asked them about it, and actually that's how I ended up on the board. So I think it's about taking initiative, and it's great to have people like that who can spur me on and give me that advice. And so that's something I can share. You know, please credit Yolanda for that.
You know, I love that. I'll get to Yolanda's question next. But if I can just add something there as well. I mean, the board that I sit on, it's also someone that I did articles with many years back. And I do think that it is about being excellent in everything that you do all the time, because people notice. And then I think also it's about networks. So it is about Absip, and it is about talking to people, getting to know people, engaging in conversations, getting mentors, getting sponsors, because you don't know where those mentors and sponsors will end up as well, and how they might be able to help you one day.
And I would recommend the people get the certification as well if you can. So start doing the kind of Institute Director courses, because I think that's also a great network to, they actually often write to their members informing them of which boards are looking for people. And then in some cases, actually some boards also use recruitment companies. So that's something to look for as well, is the executive search companies often are approached by boards to help them with finding board members. So I think that's something to think about as well.
Yeah. Thanks. So Yolanda gets a question answered because of her great tip. Yolanda Cuba, what have been the 2 or 3 things that you did that were the key accelerators to your success?
I think the one thing is you work hard. I think that's probably the first thing, and it's kind of relevant. So, always try and do something that is in line with actually what the broader organization is trying to achieve, and work really hard at that, and try to be a success in those things, and make sure that you bring your team with you. I think that's something which also is maybe accelerates my success, is in learning that kind of insights about teams and how important relying on your team is, and the people management, and how actually what you're trying to do is bring out the best in the team that you're working with. I think that actually played a very big role in particular my time when I was managing member solutions in corporate, was just working with a great team and seeing how you can enable them to do the things that they are really, really good at. So that was important. And then I think a third one, it's not necessarily like I say something that I did, but I think it's just making sure you're open to learning, and then leveraging people who can be your sponsors, and learning from people who you're benefiting from their mentorship. So I think, yeah, those are some of the things that I, maybe assisted. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I might have asked the wrong Yolanda's question. So there's another Yolanda Sizula here. I think that's the one, right?
No, it was Yolanda Tuba. It was Yolanda Tuba, actually.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll give both Yolandas a chance then. How do you build up confidence where it has been broken down for some time?
Sure. I guess, yeah, maybe one can borrow from, the learnings that lots of people talk about, in the sense that focus on like one thing that you'll do well, and do that well, and celebrate the achievement that you achieve in that small thing, because that's what will help with giving you the confidence to do the next thing, which is a slightly bigger scope, and the next thing, which is a slightly bigger scope. So I think that's maybe one of the things to just take into consideration, is what's a smaller thing that you can achieve, and in achieving that, get the confidence to challenge yourself to something bigger, because that's kind of how the path leads you to kind of doing the big things that you may want to do. So maybe that's it. I'm sure somebody else might have better advice, but I think that's maybe one thing which I wanted to say.
No, actually, I really like that. I mean, I think it's incremental steps. You can't go and climb Table Mountain if you went for your first jog yesterday, or whatever the case may be. But you've got to build that confidence back up slowly. It's the only way it will last, because otherwise the next thing will knock you down again. So I think you're absolutely right. You've got to build a solid foundation.
Yep. And sometimes doing something without necessarily knowing just how hard it is also good. It's just about starting. I like the use of the mountain analogy, because I think climbing Mount Kilimanjaro is like that, I watched like one video maybe a few days before I went on the expedition, but I think, having known what is involved, like, I don't know whether I'll do it again, and sometimes it's good to actually kind of have an air of mystery, because you just have to trust that the training that you've had will actually put you in good stead and enable you to summit. Yeah.
I think it's fair to say you probably had a fair amount of confidence going into that.
No, I found out that I was on the team like 8 weeks before we went. Everybody else had like 4 months to train. So yeah, no. That's really...
That's amazing though. Okay, so I'm just going to ask 2 more questions. Okay, maybe three more, because I want to end off on Absip's question because it's quite a special one. But I mean, Karabo, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for the time and for the effort that you've put into answering these questions. So just 2 or 3 more. Can you share your personal icons of empowered women and what sets them apart?
Ooh. I'll maybe give like, yeah, a few. There's so many. I think in South Africa, I think we're fortunate. Sometimes they're not always highlighted, but they're certainly there. And I think maybe on the global stage, Christine Lagarde is somebody who I think about, and it's because she gave an anecdote at one of the World Economic Forums. She said, as Minister of Finance, when people would say, you know, she would ask them, you know, why don't you have gender diversity on your boards, etc. And they say, no, we don't know where these women are. And so what she said she did was she kept a list of 20 people who could serve as directors on boards in financial services, and she would keep it in her handbag. And everybody said, no, we don't know where they are. Then she'd hand this list out. So that was something which I thought was really great. And so I think similarly in roles, you know, if you're one of your male colleagues is challenged with getting diversity into his team, you can say, no, here's a list of women who I thought would be really great for your role, you know, the roles that you're looking for, because, you know, it's not that hard to find amazing people, women who are talented in many areas, in all areas. So that's somebody who I think about quite a lot. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is also someone who I think about a lot. I often wonder whether I've gotten her double barrel surname the right way around or not. That's why I'm coming, but this confused face on my mouth, you know, facial expression. And so I think her and the management of the Ebola crisis in West Africa was really remarkable. And so that's somebody who I think about a lot. I think most recently, Jacinda Ardern, in her management of what's been happening in New Zealand, actually all the time that she's been Prime Minister. So that's something which is quite inspiring. And in South Africa, I think, yeah, there's many people who kind of, you know, do stand out, you know, people who have done great things. And, you know, you see them often on the Absip leadership. You see them often on the leadership of several kind of big companies. And I think it's great to acknowledge some of those people. And, you know, yes, in Women's Month, you often see people who are amazing. You know, Yolanda gave a talk yesterday. There was a couple of others. Some unsung heroes as well. There are many people who are supporting other women, and I think that's really great. So you know, always look around you, because I think one can always just be inspired. There's lots of people who are doing amazing, amazing things.
Thank you. You know, I think we are actually spoiled for choice when we look around at the women leaders, and particularly with this COVID crisis. I mean, so many women just have emerged as being completely superior. Sorry for the men out there, but in the management of this crisis.
Yes, and shout out to Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Ngatani as well, the climate activists, the young climate activists. So yeah, very inspiring.
Second last question. This is from Rafiwe Makuva. Sorry, the last one was from Claire Best, and then this one is, yeah. Is it necessary to play politics or be in a club to get ahead?
Yeah, actually, that's also one of the big things, which was a very big transition point for me from I guess, being in professional services and banking to coming into a corporate. Because yeah, sometimes you feel like it's playing politics, but what I've come to realize is actually stakeholder management. That's maybe a better word for it than politics per se. Because yeah, sometimes then the politics is given a negative connotation, and sometimes it's just about finding helping people understand where you're coming from, and helping them to understand what you're trying to achieve in terms of either getting them to support it and influencing them in that way. And yes, it can kind of delve into kind of the negative, but yeah, you know, ideally you try to kind of, you know, stay the course and stay to the principle of the matters that you're dealing with, because that's, I think, quite important. It is always unfortunate when, yeah, people are in a club. I think, you know, there's a long history of people who are the people who go cycling together, and then that's what informs people's opinions of them in the work context, and that's kind of challenging, yeah. So yeah, I think it's it's not, I think it's not necessarily necessary to be in a club to get ahead. I'm hoping. I think that's, you know, you want to try and work in an organization where it's not about that. There's a focus on the meritocracy. Yeah.
Yeah. Now we all see those asset management firms that all go mountain biking together. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, Karabo. I think that you do need a certain amount of not necessarily political, but organizational psychology in the workplace in terms of understanding people's motivations. And a lot of the times that can come across as being political, but actually, you know, if you don't understand why people do what they do, you can't really engage with them.
You've described it exactly as it needs to be described. Yeah.
So here's my last question from you. It's from Absip again, but I had to ask it. So Karabo, on a lighter note, why does a Google search of you bring up Karabo Morule's salary as the first suggestion and Karabo Morule husband as the second suggestion? Did you know this?
So I think that's something to do with the Google algorithm. Anytime you search for like a male, it'll just say wife afterwards. I don't know if, you know, people are love focused, whatever it is, or partner focused, who knows. But the salary one was such an interesting conversation point. It happened for the first time last year, sorry, in 2000, last year, because I was a prescribed officer. And so, like I say, all prescribed officers, actually, it's a listing requirement to publish their salaries. Yeah. And so we had an interesting conversation point with my colleagues actually around it. Unfortunately, I wasn't here. I actually had gone to Harvard, so I didn't necessarily follow all the publications around it. But we had an interesting conversation point about the fact that all the media highlighted all the Black people's salaries and what they made, and never mentioned any of the white colleagues, even though they made way more than us. And that was something which was quite remarkable, actually, is that time and time again, it's really unfortunate that actually this kind of happens to people where it's all published on the same page. Why is it that you're highlighting only the Black people's salaries? And I think that's about policing Black people's wealth, and it's really unfortunate. Yeah. So that's probably what's related to that, is there was some news articles last year when we released our results as All Mutual Limited for the first time. And yeah, it's kind of sad, actually. Yeah, that there's such a huge part, which is made about.
That kind of backfired on me because I wanted to end on a bit of a fun question. And you know, the Karabo Morule husband, and why, you know, why are people, you know, almost as interested in that as they are in your salary? But I think it's a really important point that you raise. And I mean, unfortunately, it is still a feature of the world that we live in. Yeah. But I think, you know, it's up to all of us to question these things and to put them out there, and, you know, not to keep quiet about it when we see, you know, there's just a complete different treatment.
Yeah.
In Black versus white executives, and what is the reason for it?
Yeah.
So I mean, I know we as Absip won't keep quiet. I know Pulo won't keep quiet. You know, there's an important battles to be fought here, and changes that need to be made. But Carol, you have been absolutely phenomenal. I'm so sorry to everyone whose questions didn't get asked. I think we answered a lot though. But thank you so much for your time. This was an amazing way to kickstart Women's Month. I'm so excited about the rest of August. I'm so excited to see what you're going to do next. You know, we'll be watching with great interest, and, you know, yeah, thank you. I mean, really, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this has been an amazing platform, and I'm also looking forward to the rest of the panelists on Women's Month. And I think what's been really great about a lot of these is you just learn so much. So hopefully I've been able to impart also some knowledge to some people, and they take something away that they can hopefully apply in their own spheres of influence as well. So thank you very much again for this platform, Absip.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.